Chapter 1. A Coldplay. It was 15 seconds. 15 seconds that the world refused to let go. It was July 16th, 2025. Gillette Stadium in Foxborough, Massachusetts. 70,000 people packed the venue to watch Coldplay perform their Music of the Spheres tour, a spectacle of light and sound and the kind of collective joy that only a stadium show can manufacture. Somewhere in that crowd, in the warm anonymity of tens of thousands of bodies, two people stood close together. A man with his arms around a woman, both of them swaying, both of them, it seemed, not particularly concerned about being seen. Chris Martin has a bit he does on this tour. He calls it the jumbotron song. The cameras sweep the crowd, finding couples, and Martin improvises, singing little personalized observations, turning strangers into characters, making the audience laugh. It is charming and playful and utterly routine. It had happened at hundreds of shows before this one. On this night, in this moment, the camera found two people in an embrace and put them on the big screen for the stadium to see. What happened next took about 15 seconds. The man had his arms around the woman. The woman, sensing the light, turned, saw the screen, and immediately brought her hands up to cover her face. The man dropped instantly, ducking out of frame as though the floor had become suddenly very interesting. Martin, watching from the stage, read the room with the instincts of someone who has performed for millions of people and knows exactly when a moment has shifted. "Either they're having an affair," he said into the microphone, a beat of delighted mischief in his voice, "or they're just very shy." The crowd laughed, and then someone in the audience, a concert-goer named Grace Springer, filmed it and put it on TikTok. And then the world took over. Within hours, the clip had been viewed millions of times. Within days, that number climbed past 150 million on TikTok alone. 300 billion total views across every platform, every format, every variation. It was one of the most watched moments of the year. Not a geopolitical event, not a natural disaster, not a sporting championship. Two people at a concert, 15 seconds, and the specific electric recognition of a moment that felt like it meant something. The internet did what it always does. It dissected, it rewound, it zoomed in. Frame by frame, people studied the body language, the comfort of that embrace, the ease of it, the way two people hold each other when they have spent time learning each other's weight. That was not the posture of colleagues at a work function. That was not the awkward proximity of two people who happened to be standing near each other. That was intimacy. The unguarded kind, the kind that only exists in private or in the moment before you remember you are not. And then the question started. Who are they? Are they married? To each other? To other people? Are they colleagues? Is one of them his boss? Is this an affair? The story wrote itself in the space between those questions. It always does. Within 24 hours, they had been identified. The man was Andy Byron, the CEO of Astronomer, a New York-based AI data platform company valued at over $1 billion. The woman was Kristen Cabot, the chief people officer of the same company, head of human resources. The person, in other words, professionally responsible for overseeing workplace conduct, protecting employees, and ensuring that the company's values were upheld. Both of them were married. To other people. The irony was too neat. The CEO and the head of HR, the two people at any company most associated with the rules, caught in what looked unmistakably like exactly the kind of situation those rules exist to govern. The internet did not miss it. The jokes wrote themselves. The memes proliferated with the speed and efficiency that the internet reserves for moments when the symbolic resonance is simply too perfect to resist. Astronomer issued a statement. It was brief and bloodless, the kind of corporate language designed to say something while committing to nothing. The company was committed to the values and culture that have guided us since our founding. Within days, Andy Byron resigned as CEO. Within days of that, Kristen Cabot also resigned. 2 senior executives gone, a billion-dollar company suddenly in need of new leadership, all of it traceable back to 15 seconds at a Coldplay concert. Now pause here, because this is the point at which the story becomes more interesting than the spectacle suggests. Because what people were reacting to, what made this moment so overwhelming in its reach and so enduring in its grip, was not really the professional irony, though that certainly helped. It was not really the celebrity of the company, which most people had never heard of before this moment. It was not even, ultimately, the infidelity itself, though that was the word that circulated most. It was recognition. People watched that footage, the turn, the cover, the duck, the mortification frozen on their faces. And they felt something. Something older and more personal than outrage, something closer to memory. Women in particular, and this has been noted and written about extensively in the months since, felt something land in their chest when they watched it. A familiar weight. The echo of a fear that lives quietly in many relationships, not always spoken aloud, sometimes barely acknowledged even to oneself. What if this is happening when I am not looking? What if, right now, in some ordinary context, an office, a conference, a concert, the person I trust is standing close to someone else with that particular ease? What if the story I believe about my own life is not the whole story? What if familiarity hides something that would undo everything I have built? That is what people saw in those 15 seconds. Not just 2 executives, not just a corporate scandal. They saw a possibility, the shape of something that had happened to them, or that they had feared, or that they had narrowly escaped. And when you see the shape of your own worst fear made visible, put on a jumbotron and broadcast to 70,000 people, then to 300 billion, you do not respond with measured objectivity. You respond with everything you are carrying. The backlash was enormous, and parts of it were ugly. Cabot received between 50 and 60 death threats. Her children were afraid, genuinely, viscerally afraid, that they were going to be harmed. She was doxxed. For weeks, she received 500 to 600 calls a day. She was followed by cameras. She was, by any reasonable measure, subjected to a level of public punishment grotesquely disproportionate to what a camera had captured at a concert. This matters. It must be said clearly and without qualification. Harassment is never accountability. Threats against someone's children are not justice. The transformation of a human being into a meme is not the same as holding someone responsible for their choices. Much of what followed that 15-second clip was not moral reckoning. It was mob logic wearing the costume of moral reckoning, and the difference is important. And yet, the reaction did not come from nowhere. It came from somewhere real. It came from women who had lived a version of this, from people who had been lied to and gaslit and told they were imagining things, only to discover eventually that they had not been imagining anything. It came from the long accumulated exhaustion of watching powerful men navigate consequences differently than everyone else, of watching them duck and disappear while others absorbed the full weight of exposure. It came, in part, from the specific shape of this particular story, a CEO and his head of HR, the person whose job it was to protect other employees from exactly this kind of power dynamic. When people recognize a pattern, when something triggers not just an opinion but a memory, a wound, a specific feeling in the body, they do not respond with nuance. They respond with the full force of what they are carrying, not always fairly, not always wisely, but not always without reason. This is where the conversation becomes genuinely uncomfortable because it requires us to hold two truths at once. The reaction went too far. The reaction did not come from nowhere. Both things are true. Both things matter. And collapsing one into the other, using the ugliness of the pile-on to dismiss the legitimacy of the feeling, or using the legitimacy of the feeling to excuse the ugliness of the pile-on, is how we avoid the harder conversation entirely. There is one more layer to this story, a layer that only emerged later and that changed the texture of everything that came before. Kristen Cabot's estranged husband, Andrew Cabot, CEO of Privateer Rum, a man who by her own account remained one of her greatest supporters through everything that followed, was also in the stadium that night. Cabot learned this from her daughter via text as she was walking into the concert. She had a moment of thought. Is this going to be weird if he sees me with Andy? She was in the middle of a separation. So was her husband, by his account. They had agreed to divorce weeks before the concert. It was, she would later say, amicable. And then she walked in and stood with Byron, and the camera found them, and none of that context existed yet for anyone watching. Context is everything. Context is also often invisible, and the speed of the internet does not pause to gather it. What the world saw was a married woman embracing her married boss at a concert. What the world did not see, could not see, was a separation already underway, a marriage already ending, a woman who had, by her own account, pulled Byron's arms around her in a moment of feeling, in a stadium where she had believed, for one apparently reasonable moment, that she was anonymous. I was like, I got this. I can have a crush. I can handle it, she would later tell the New York Times. She could not handle it. Nobody could have handled what happened next, because what happened next was not proportionate to the moment. It was proportionate to everything the moment represented to everyone who watched it. There is something worth sitting with in the detail of how Cabot eventually told her story. She gave interviews. She spoke to the New York Times. She sat with Oprah. She explained the separation, the context, the high noon she'd had that night, the fact that she and Byron had not been physically intimate before the concert, the fact that she had not kissed him until that moment on the jumbotron. She explained that she was embarrassed and horrified, that she knew exactly how it looked, that she owned the poor decision and had paid an unimaginable price for it. She also said something else. She said that what the backlash had shown her made it harder to believe that men were the ones holding women back. I think we are holding ourselves back tremendously by cutting each other down, she said. She called out Gwyneth Paltrow and Ryan Reynolds for appearing in an astronomer advertisement that nodded to the incident, finding it disappointing that a woman whose brand was built on uplifting other women would participate in something that further humiliated her. All of that is understandable. Some of it is even fair. Being attacked, doxxed, threatened, and mocked does not bring out generous thinking in anyone. But there is a question lurking beneath the surface of how the story was told, a question about who was centered in the narrative and who was not. Cabot spoke at length about her own experience of the fallout, the job loss, the threats, the inability to find new work, the toll on her children. What received less attention in the telling was the experience of Byron's wife, of a woman who had not separated from her husband, had not agreed to a divorce, and who learned, along with the rest of the world, what had been happening when she was not looking. Her name is rarely mentioned. She has remained private, out of the spotlight, holed up at a home in Maine according to some reports, having removed her last name from social media. She gave no interviews. She offered no public accounting. She simply absorbed the moment quietly, away from the cameras. And Byron himself, the CEO, the man in the frame, said nothing at all, resigned and disappeared. left Cabot to carry the weight of the public narrative, while he moved in silence. This, too, is a pattern that people recognized. Beneath the spectacle, beneath the memes and the death threats and the corporate statements and the Oprah interviews, there is a question that this book keeps returning to. When the light fades and the explanation begins, and the narrative is rebuilt, whose story gets told? Who chooses what is centered and what is left at the edges? And when someone speaks, finally, after months of silence, are they telling the truth? Or are they telling a version of the truth, carefully shaped to protect what matters most to them, dressed up in enough honesty to feel like the full story? There is a difference between truth revealed and truth rearranged. The difference is not always obvious. It tends to arrive in the language of accountability and growth and moving forward. It tends to include just enough acknowledgement to satisfy the audience, and not quite enough to fully account for the people who were most affected by what happened. Learning to tell the difference between the story being offered and the story that is actually there is the project this book undertakes. It begins here, in 15 seconds, at a Coldplay concert. In the moment, a camera found two people who had forgotten or simply stopped caring that the world could see them. Chris Martin's song was meant to be playful. It was meant to bring a crowd together in laughter and warmth. Instead, it opened something, a window onto a story that millions of people felt they already knew, because in one form or another, many of them had lived it. That is why the world refused to let it go, not because of the spectacle, because of the signal inside it.